All right. Well, this morning, Pastor Daniel and I talked a little bit about what I might speak on this morning, as he started his series on the family of God last week. And so he assigned me the theme of the family of God being intergenerational. He seemed to think I might know a little bit of something about that, working with kids and young people. But it's not just about kids and young people in the church family. And so I want us to talk a little bit about what it means to be all together, part of the body, the family of God. And so to start this morning, I would like to have you think about some family gatherings maybe. And here I have a table. And if you'll notice the table, it's set with fine china, stemware, silverware, fancy tablecloth, cloth napkins. Looks like maybe a Christmas dinner with the Christmas centerpiece. And now a second table. Most likely the card table. If you notice where the table is in relation to the other table, everybody's backs are to the kids. We've got sippy cups. I don't even know if there's napkins. Maybe more likely we're using shirt sleeves. We've got food coming out of the mouth, conversations probably reduced to highly intellectual conversation about who's done what to whom and whatnot. So who are the guests at the first table typically? The adults, right? And the second table, we have the kids' table. In our family growing up, I didn't come from a very large, extended family, but when we met at my grandmother's house, the kitchen was pretty full, and she didn't have a kids' table, she had a kids' counter. And so her counter in the old farmhouse had this board that kind of inserted into the counter. And so she would pull that out, and she'd put some stools up to it, and probably the 3 or 4 of us older kids in the family got to sit at the counter off to the side of the grown-up table. And we can be at the same meal as kids and adults, but maybe not having the same dining experience, right? I don't know about your families, but in mine, the adult table, they're probably not having a food fight. They're probably not kicking and punching each other. Whereas those are probably the things that are taking place at the kids' table, right? And I think that can sometimes be what our experience is at church. The kids go off and do their thing, the teens go off and do their thing. They're having this experience over here. And adults, we're here in the grown-up service. We're having our adult meetings, and it's a different experience. And I think there's value to those things for sure, but there are times that we need to come together as the family of God and have a shared experience of what it means to live out our faith as part of the family of God. And so this morning, I want to just think about some of those different examples that we see in Scripture. God designed for us to live out our faith in community. We see it time and time again. We see him instructing the Israelites to share their stories of what he has done for them as a people and to pass it on from generation to generation. We see Eli, the priest, mentoring young Samuel in the temple. The Psalms are full of exhortations, even like Susan shared this morning, that we are to share with future generations what he has done. In the New Testament, we see time and time again examples of families coming to Christ. We see the Philippian jailer who came to know the Lord along with his entire family. Lydia was baptized along with her entire family. And this morning, I'd like us to look at a passage that takes place in the early church in Acts chapter 20, verses 7 to 12, if you'd like to follow along with me. And this is a passage that I hadn't really been familiar with, hadn't really stood out to me before, but it was where I was directed to this morning. And so it says this: On the first day of the week, we gathered with the local believers to share in the Lord's Supper. Paul was preaching to them, and since he was leaving the next day, he kept talking until midnight. The upstairs room where we met was lighted with many flickering lamps. As Paul spoke on and on, a young man named Eutychus, sitting on the windowsill, became very drowsy. Finally, he fell asleep and dropped 3 stories to his death below. Paul went down, bent over him, and took him into his arms. "Don't worry," he said, "he's alive." Then they all went back upstairs, shared in the Lord's Supper, and ate together. Paul continued talking to them until dawn, and then he left. Meanwhile, the young man was taken home alive and well, and everyone was greatly relieved. I read this, and I literally laughed in my office. I'm like, what a funny story. And initially, it kind of looks like, don't fall asleep in church, right? Bad things can happen. How humorous. And it actually took me back to youth a few weeks ago. And this night in particular, we were talking about what it meant to have an overflowing faith. And I had come to youth group, and I was so excited about what we were going to talk about. And I was met to a whole circle of faces that were as blank could be, to the point I almost started to giggle. And I'm like, come on, guys, give me something here, right? And so this story almost gives me that same image. Here's Eutychus, this youth, whose name incidentally means lucky or fortunate one. A little bit of irony there. And they're in the upper room. Paul is there for a short time, and so he's getting it all in what he has to say to the church. It's midnight. He's preaching till midnight. It's late. It's probably getting warm with the crowd in the room. The candles are making it warm. And here's Eutychus, and where is he sitting? In a windowsill, off in the corner, right? And so he's not really noticed very much about what's taking place. He starts to get warm. He starts to get drowsy. Paul's going on and on. He falls asleep and falls out the window. It is something we could definitely get a chuckle out of, right? But I think it's important to take note of where Eutychus was positioned. Would the same thing have happened if he was in the body? He was off in the peripheral, right? And nobody was really noticing what was happening to Eutychus. I mentioned in my children's sermon that I had the privilege of being raised going to church with my grandparents. And my grandfather was a farmer, and I think he worked so hard physically every day that church was one of the only times that he really sat down. And so, inevitably, the head would start to doze during church. And I sat beside my grandparents a lot in church. And so once you'd start to see Grandpa's head going like this, you'd give him the elbow. And Grandpa always kept peppermints in his pocket. And so he'd give you a peppermint, I think, kind of as his bribe to leave him alone. But then eventually the head would start to doze again, and you'd give him another elbow, right? There was nobody there to give Eutychus the elbow. And I don't think it's so much about his physical slumber as it is about potentially spiritual slumber, right? He falls from the window to his death. At this point, the church reacts. They rush outside. Paul throws himself on him and raises him back to life. The meeting continues, and everyone goes home greatly relieved that Eutychus is alive and well. And as a church family, we have a responsibility to our children and our young people to help guard against spiritual slumber, to draw the youth and the children into our family, into an active part of the family, and to come alongside those young people so that we can continue to draw them into the family. And so how do we do this? Well, the first thing I would suggest is that we spend time together. As adults in the family, you play an important role in the spiritual formation of our children and young people. Not just in supporting separate programs and events for children and youth, but by interacting and engaging with our young people. And a lot of what I want to share with you this morning is taken from the book Sticky Faith, shameless plug for the church library. You can find it there. Parents, a lot of it is geared to parents, and I would suggest grandparents as well, but there is a lot of good stuff in here for the church as well. And a lot of it comes out of research that was done at the Fuller Youth Institute. And in this book, Dr. Kara Powell writes that kids experience Jesus Christ when adults in the church give them grace, time, and genuine love with no hidden agenda. Forming one's identity is a very large part of being a teenager. And she goes on to say that a rich and sustainable faith recognizes that as I walk in community with God's people, I ultimately discover who I am. So what are some of the things that are taking place in our church right now? Because I think we do a great job. You do a great job as a church family to embrace our young people. I think we can always do more, but I want to share with you a few things that I've been encouraged by, and I know a lot of our youth leaders have been encouraged by as well. There is definitely value in age-related programs and activities, but it is important for us to share those common experiences. Worshiping together, serving together, eating together, playing together. These are all valuable ways that our children and young people are influenced. And there are a lot of you who are directly involved with our young people. And so I want to just share with you a picture from our youth retreat that we had early February, and so many of you were part of sending this group to go. And part of that weekend away, we had 13 young people, 11 adults, and 4 children. And you want to talk about being able to influence young people. Our ratio was almost 1-to-1 with teens and young people. And one of my favorite parts of the weekend, given that we had that many adults, I assigned each one to a teen to pray for leading up to the retreat, and that we set aside time specifically during the retreat for kids, the teens, and their youth leader to pray together. And so Sunday afternoon, as you were worshiping here, we were having our worship time together at Graphite Bible Camp. And the teens and their youth leaders paired off one-on-one, some two-on-one, and prayed together. And it was just a really beautiful picture. And it wasn't just youth leaders praying for teens. I know in several situations there were teens praying for their youth leader too. And just a great way of coming together and praying for one another and supporting each other. The other thing that I'm really encouraged by is the prayer partners that we have, and I know how much they have played an important role for so many of our young people. And so there's a series of pictures here that were from our prayer partner night that we had just a couple weeks ago. And everyone was here pretty much with their prayer partners. It was a horrible night weather-wise, and we were missing a few due to the weather, but again, a great time coming together, getting to know each other better, and then having an ongoing relationship throughout a young person's time in youth through into sending them to college and university, and praying for each other. And some have turned into mentoring relationships, and again, just a beautiful way of coming around our youth specifically and is supporting and encouraging them in their faith walk. Research conducted by the Fuller Institute ranked 5 sources of support for young people. And those 5 sources were adults in the congregation, parents, youth workers, friends in youth group, and friends outside of youth group. Which one of those 5 do you think ranked last as being the most significant source of support, or that teens found as the least significant. It wasn't parents. It was adults in the congregation. And it came in a long way behind. And by far, the number one way that churches made teens in their survey feel welcomed and valued was when adults in the congregation actually showed an interest in them. More than any single program or event, adults making the effort to get to know the kids was far more likely to make the kids feel like a significant part of their church. One student exclaimed, "We were welcomed not just in youth group, we were welcomed into other parts of the ministry of the church, whether it be in the worship or praise team on Sunday mornings, or whether it be teaching Sunday school to the kids or helping with cleaning and serving. All of these other types of things really just brought the youth in and made them feel like they had a place and even feel like they were valued as individuals." Secondly, with this in mind, it's important for us to create a web of support around each of our children and young people in our church. A lot of ministry has come to be around ratios, and it's more from a protection standpoint, a supervision standpoint, and one of the ratios would be that there are no more than 5 kids to 1 adult. But, again, from the research that has been found, if we flip that ratio to 5 to 1, 5 adults to 1 child or young person, they are more likely to continue to walk in their faith. And that becomes a little bit overwhelming as a youth leader, to have 5 adults for each kid. Can you imagine our small groups at youth group? 5 adults and 1 kid? Be a little overwhelming, wouldn't it, Owen? Yeah. But that's not necessarily what this means. It's not specifically youth leaders, small group leaders. It's adults in the church family that are making that point to connect with our kids, to say, how are you doing? How was your week? And it's in small ways, it's in bigger ways. And parents, I would encourage you to start looking around. Who are those adults that you can start to connect with your young person? Young people, I would encourage you to start finding those people to put around yourself. And look for people that you look up to, people that share common interests that can maybe come alongside and invest in you that way. If there's a small group that's doing a service project, invite a younger group to come and join you. When you're in the church foyer or at Social Sunday or at another church family gathering, seek out one of the kids, ask how their week has been, offer a word of encouragement. I came from a smaller church, and so there wasn't a lot of young people around. And a lot of my friends in the church became my parents' friends, my grandparents' friends. But one person who played a really significant role in my life was a man named Bert. And Bert, as a teen, was really old, which is kind of funny looking back, because probably when I was a young person, he was probably only in his 60s. But he just always felt like he was really old. But Bert and his wife, Evelyn, were 2 of those people that they impacted so many of the young people in our church. And I have friends that are in ministry, and I've heard some of their podcasts and things, and they're preaching sermons on Bert because he has just impacted so many of our lives. And I can't say there's anything revolutionary or profound that Bert did, but Bert was my Sunday school teacher. And every week he'd come into class, and he would say, "Oh, you guys don't want to hear from me today. I'm too old." And we would say, "No, you're not." Like he was, but he wasn't. And we loved Bert. We wanted him to be there, and we knew that Bert loved us. And Bert would pray for us every Sunday. And Bert was one of those people that every time he prayed, it felt like you were right in the presence of God. And he would be moved to tears when he would pray. And he would cry over us as he prayed for us. And even after I left for university, And after I moved to Peterborough, he would still come, and Evelyn would still come. And they would say, how are you doing? How are things going? I'm praying for you. And as I started to get a little older and there was no men in my life, he'd kind of meddle in that area, right? And be like, I'm praying for a spouse for you. I know that God's got good plans for you. And you just knew. And I still know that Bert is praying for me. And he called me, he and Evelyn, due to failing health, moved from Forster's Falls to be closer to his daughter so that she could care for them. And due to failing health, they weren't able to make it to Rob's and my wedding. But I got a phone call from Bert on my wedding morning to say, Evelyn and I are praying for you. And those are the kind of influences that each and every one of us can have on some of the kids and the young people in our midst. And especially for our children and our young people who don't come from Christian families, who don't have parents that are helping to build that web of support for them, as a church family, we need to be even that much more intentional about surrounding them and bringing them into the family. The third thing that we can do is to share your stories of both how God has worked in your life individually and how you have seen God at work in the church. Our stories are profound. In Deuteronomy 11, the Israelites are instructed to share the many miracles of what God did to bring them out of Egypt and into the promised land, so that their children and their children's children could know the story of what God had done for them as a means of strengthening their faith. You may impact the life of a young person that you may never even know how you've done it. I did some informal research in preparing for this morning, and I was talking to some of the kids after Sunday school a couple weeks ago. I was washing up dishes after snack, and I had 4 of them lined up looking at me over the counter. And I'm like, hey, this is a good time for me to ask you guys, what does it mean to you to be part of the family of God? And at first, I kind of got like those looks like, I don't know what you're talking about. So I tried again, and I said, what would it be like for you if you went to a church that only had kids your age? I got gasps of horror. Why? I asked. And Caleb was there too, helping his mom or his grandma and grandpa putting communion away. And I said, Caleb, I'll ask you this question too. And he said, because without adults, there would be no one to look up to. And Amelia gave me a beautiful response. And I wish I'd had a video camera going because it was just priceless. I didn't. I asked her to write down some of her thoughts for me. And in summary, this is what she had said. To me, church means love and joy. When I walk into my second house, my family, through God, is helping me understand the Bible and God. It feels like a huge family. So our kids are feeling that already. And so thank you for that. Keep up the good work. And young people, I want to speak to you for a second. Your role in the family is equally important. In the account of Eutychus, everyone was greatly relieved to take him home. Some translations say that they were comforted. As the adults of our church family watch you growing in your faith, it brings them comfort and happiness and blessing. And so I would say to you, take the opportunity to be part of the family. Come to youth group, absolutely. Have fun learning with your peers. But make it a priority to be at Sunday worship with the larger family. Take the opportunity to come out to whole church events. Secondly, find a way to serve, both those younger than you and those who are older than you. You also have younger people looking up to you. And again, from our book that I've made reference to, she writes, young children at church tend to assume that adults will pay attention to them. But when the big kids do, their self-esteem and their love for church skyrocket. They are watching you. Set an example for them as Paul encouraged Timothy in 1 Timothy 4:12 when he writes, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Mike Parrington has shared a story from our retreat of a picture of how well our teens, too, are looking after those that are looking up to them, coming behind them. And this picture is of some of the teens, the leaders, and kids, Owen Holmes, playing dodgeball in the gym while we were at the retreat. And the teens are just chucking those dodgeballs. And here's little Owen in the middle of it, probably thinking that he is one of the teens, but he's not. And if he gets hit with one of those balls, it's probably going to hurt pretty badly. But Mike was so impressed with how the teens kind of played around him, included him in what was going on, but yet made sure that he was safe and protected. And so it's so neat how the family plays a part into each other's lives at each level and each stage of development throughout the family. And thirdly, young people, I would say to you, seek out Christian mentors who can support and encourage you. Look around at the adults in the family of God. Who are those people that you admire and look up to? I admire so many people in our church, and I feel like I've grown up here too. I was 23 when I rolled in to Peterborough, and I'm not even going to say how many years ago that was, but one of the many people that I admire and look up to is Mr. Barkley Smith. And if you're going to do some research and you want a senior's perspective, I thought just go straight to the top. So I called Barkley and I asked him what it means to him to be part of the family of God. And this is his response. Being part of the church family is a way of showing that you love the God you serve, but it also means that you acquire friendships among God's people that will support you when you go through valleys. And I asked Barkley how he would like to be part of a church made up of only seniors. To which he exclaimed, and I don't know if I can do it justice to how emphatically he said it, but he said, "I wouldn't like it at all. Our youth bring life to the church. We need them to keep coming, and it helps to form a habit and just becomes a part of what you do." Young people, look to the adults and the seniors. Ask them their stories. Ask how they have seen God at work in their lives. You will be inspired, and there is a lot that we can learn from how they have stayed strong in their faith through all kinds of challenges. And there is a lot that we can learn from each other. And I thought this picture was great. Take a moment to get to know them. They know cool stuff you don't. And it goes both ways. Let us continue to love one another and give thanks for each other. We all have a place in the family. And in closing, I would like us to pray together for each other. And I came across this prayer, and I'm going to invite you to stand with me. And there's a part that will say, go ahead and stand. There's a part that addresses the adults, and I'm going to have you read. And youth, you're smaller in numbers, and I know that. So I'm not going to put you totally on the spot. I'm going to ask youth leaders and parents to help the youth out when we get to the part where the youth are going to pray for the adults in our congregation. And on the parts that say all, let's read it together. Give thanks to the Lord our God, who has created all life. God's love is forever. Open our eyes to the joys and the gifts to be learned, shared from all the seasons of life. Open our eyes that we may know your love at each moment in our lives. Adults, thank you, God, for children who are curious, unafraid, and infectiously joyful, who are trusting receivers of God's grace. We thank you and praise you, God, for children. Thank you for the young who demonstrate courage and hope as they begin new adventures for their fresh ideas and their energies. We thank and praise you, God, for the young. All right, youth and those who are going to help us out. For those in the middle years of life, we give thanks, dear Lord, for steady hands and hearts that guide the young and offer their experience to us all. We thank and praise you, God, for those in the middle years of life. For those grown up and grown old, dear Lord, we celebrate your special gift. We give thanks for joys seen only through the eyes of those who are wise in their age and whose stories of life lived can enrich all our lives. We give thanks and praise, dear Lord, for those who have grown old. Guide our lives, Lord, so that in each stage of life we recognize and cherish the joys and sorrows, the strengths and weaknesses, and the special presence of your Spirit, not only in our own season of life, but in the lives of each other, young, old, or in between. Dear God, we give you praise and thanksgiving for all the seasons of life, and we ask that you open our eyes that we may see the unique gift of each person's life created out of your love. Amen.